Welcome to the Bloom Where You're Planted podcast from Never Too Late Cafe. I'm your host, Laura Womack. Each week we sit down for a chat with someone just like you, someone who had an idea, a passion, a dream, or sometimes just a thought, and planted that seed, watched it grow into something they wanted to share with the world. If you have an idea for a topic or someone that would be a guest for the Bloom Where You're Planted podcast, feel free to reach out to us on Facebook, where you can join our Never Too Late Cafe Facebook group. We'd love to hear from you. And today I have a very special guest with me, Rita Spalding. I want to welcome you, Rita.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'm quite honored and grateful.
Well, we chatted briefly and I have some information on you, but it's so funny that sometimes I'll meet someone and have no clue of all the things that they've accomplished or have done, and you're no exception. There's a whole long list here. So one of your things is that you're a writer, and that goes way back. So can you kind of share a little bit about your story and your influences at a young age?
I will. I'm a nature's child. I'm a wild child. And when I was 8 years old, I used to go in the woods behind our house, far behind our house, and lay a blanket down. And I don't know where the idea came to me because I don't remember reading any significant poetry, but that is what I love. So I grew up in a rural environment and it required constant work. My escape was to disappear in the woods with the blanket. Maybe if I was back there, they couldn't find me. So I'm 71 now. So I've been writing for a very long time. Like I said, I was about 8 years old. I'd go out and throw the blanket down, and whatever came to my mind, I'd write about it. And I've been doing it since then. And yes, I stay kind of quiet about things that I've accomplished. And even with my children, they know that I had a book come out, but I went to the wonderful Imaginarium convention, which is where I got to, well, I met you once before then, but that's where I got to meet you and talk a little more. So after I went to that, my oldest son, who will soon be 51, I was talking to him, and something that came through my mind was in one of the seminars, the presenter talked about the imposter syndrome. Are you familiar with that term?
Absolutely.
I've never heard of it. I had never heard of it. I found out that I had that. So my story with my son, I used him as a guinea pig, and I said, Jason, if someone asked you what your mother does, what would you answer? Because I've had other careers, but I said, what does she do? And he said, I'd say you're a writer. And I said, well, thank you for acknowledging that. If someone said, has your mother published anything, and what would you say? And he'd say, a book. And in that moment, I thought, if this is my son and he doesn't know, I am not a person normally to talk about me, but for Pete's sake, my children need to know that I've done a few things. So I asked him, I said, did you know that I was a director of Women Who Write? Did you know that I helped start the first Kentucky Women's Book Festival? Did you know I've published about 125 poems? Did you know I've been in 18 anthologies? Did you know I've won awards? And he looked at me, he was like, wow, no, I did not know that. So that's part of it.
Well, tell us more about all of that long list of accomplishments. So you published a book of poetry that was in 1992, and the title was?
The title was Abstract Ribbons. The idea behind that came from, it is a poem that I wrote while my father was dying. My father has and continues to have a significant influence on my life. He passed away December 26th of 1988, but I still feel him. I feel his influence constantly. So while he was dying, I was so fortunate to be with him. I got to be at his left side. he had such strong vibes. He actually, I'm like him, I talk a lot. He talked until the last 2 minutes of his life. But in that process, when poems come to me, most often it's just a constant flow of thoughts. Sometimes it's words. I think I mentioned to you before, they come in the air, and I'll see a word, and I use my phone now than I used to, but I would see a word and I would go like this and put it in my head to remember in my head, or in my heart to remember in my heart. So I remember when my dad was going through the dying process, I was constantly doing this because so much was overflowing in me. So abstract, the poem is that we are ribbons. Every person, everything that is alive, that has life, we're ribbons tied into each other. And abstract means you can't define that. You can't just, you pull a thread and it all comes out. You tie a knot and it blocks it. But you cannot say, this is here, I'm compartmentalizing. It's all together. The act of dying is an act of life. And that in itself is an abstract image. So yes, that poem was about him dying, and how we're tied together. And in the end, life took from us what he gave us.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And that became the core of the book. The book itself, though, came about in a very unusual way.
Okay. Tell
Do you
us
want me to
about
tell you?
that. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So, I just told you the story about being in the woods and writing. I wrote on paper bags. I used a pencil. I can remember putting the pencil in my mouth and wetting it so that the writing would be really dark and it wouldn't go away. And if I had a pen, that was a really big deal. So most of it was a pencil. And I would write paper bags, pieces of paper, cloth. I remember an old tablecloth that I took back in the woods with me and wrote on. And eventually I hand wrote most of it. And left home when I was 17. When I was 39, my mother said, I was cleaning the attic and I found all of the stuff that you wrote, and started to throw it out. And then I thought, well, maybe you'd want it. I hadn't seen that in a long time. So I looked at it and flipped through it and I said, yeah, I want to keep these. And then again, my children are my inspiration for so many things. I decided, you know what? I want my kids to see stuff I wrote. And some of the stuff in the book was when I was 8 years old. The first couple of poems are. And anyway, so I decided I'm going to go to Kinko's Copies, and I'm going to get them to run copies and put these in a spiral book, 3 copies, one for each of my children. So I went to Kinko's, and Lord, I don't remember how much it cost, but it was more than what I wanted to pay. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to find another way to do this. I knew a man, his name was Rich Wilkins. He was a motivational speaker, and he had several books published through Butler Publishing in Louisville. Mm-hmm. And I told him about this, and Rich said, well, why don't you go to Butler Publishing? So I went to Butler Publishing and said, okay, I just wanted to make 3 books, one for each of my kids. And the lady, her name was Lynn, she said, well, you're going to have to do more than 3. And I said, okay, maybe 5. Maybe there'll be a couple of other people that might want. And, oh, yeah, I'll want to keep one for myself. And she said, no, we're going to have to go more than that. But she said, well, let me see what you've got. So I gave her the stack of stuff, and I had them typed. They looked neatly by then. And she said, let me look at these and I'll call you back. So she did. And a week or so later, she contacted me. And she said, I think you've got something that we can put together for you. And I'm still thinking 3 or 5 books. And honestly, I can't remember how many they published, but I remember how much she said it would cost me. So I said, well, how much? And she said, $1,500. And at the time, now single mom, 3 kids, I didn't have outside support, and $1,500 might as well have been $1,000,000. So I said, oh, well, thank you, but I guess I'll figure out another way. And she goes, no, 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 don't let go of the idea. Lynn said to me, it'll come to you. So the very next day in my mailbox, I received a check for $1,500. And I was like, what in the world is this? It turned out to be a life insurance policy that had a cutoff date on it. And my mother-in-law had gotten it out, and my mother-in-law had passed away. So somehow this came to me. And so my thought was, gosh, I could use that $1,500 to pay for this and this. And then I thought, no, ma'am, you didn't have this yesterday when Lynn told you what it would cost. So I used it to publish books, and I thought that it would, just be a handful. Well, my gosh, it opened up a world to me. That was really the beginning. I did things kind of backwards. That was the beginning of my writing and getting involved with Coretta Jones and Women Who Write. So I got them published. Holly Cook took a lot of them. I don't remember how many of them. That was a local bookstore, and called me and said, we want you to do an author meet and greet. So I went, and I still remember to this day, I was signing books. Well, it was people I knew. And I still remember the woman that came up to me. It was in December. And I said, what do you want me to put? And I looked up, and I said to her, oh, I don't know you. And she looked at me like, what? And I said, thinking to myself, it's like, wow, somebody I don't know is buying a book. So I said, well, what do you want me to put? And she said, well, I'm buying 3. I'm buying one for each of my sons for Christmas. And I was just so grateful. I couldn't believe it. I said, well, my gosh, what makes you want to buy this book? The store's full of books. I'm just a flea on a giant lion's back. And she pointed to, she had 2 different poems. And honestly, I don't remember which ones they were. But she said, well, I like this one for this son and this one for another. So that was the beginning. Then I got a phone call, or actually a letter with a woman's phone number. And I called her, and I saved her a letter. She was in Indianapolis, and wanted to use one of my poems for a meditation for a day-long retreat in Indianapolis. So I called her, and it's a group that was for biological and adoptive mothers who come together once a year. At that time they did. And every year they would take a reading or something that seemed inspirational, that they would use that for the backdrop for their day's activities. And they chose my poem.
Oh,
so
wow.
When she was talking to me, I mean, it never occurred to me that, you're supposed to have the author or publisher's permission. So she's talking to me, and I'm like, yes, please do. Yes, I'm so happy. I'm so happy. And she said, well, I sent the form to you. And I said, what form? And she said, well, we need to make sure you sign the release for us to use that. And I was like, oh my God. I was not like, oh my God, I did this. It was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to reach a handful of people that I don't even know, and they're going to use this, and it's going to help somebody.
So how did it come about? Did you actually did you get to sign it? The permission?
I did. You mean the lady at the bookstore or the other lady?
The lady from the retreat.
I did. I signed it. I signed a whole bunch, and they sold out.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. I mean, it wasn't even your intent originally. So that is exciting stuff. So that was abstract.
I just wanted my babies to have my book. Ribbons.
And then you said you were with a group, Women Who Write. Can you talk about that group a little bit?
Oh my gosh, that group was beautiful. They're still in existence. I'm not a member right now, but they were wonderful. Coretta Jones was a fantastic writer and author and playwright. And boy, she believed in you. If she saw something you wrote and she liked it, then she really believed in you. And if she saw something that she felt like you could improve on, she would let you know, which I really liked that too. But Coretta, she had an ad in Leo magazine. Oh, I tell you what, there's a tie-in to this.
Okay.
I forgot about this. Joy Pennington, I was taking a class that she was teaching at JCC. She mentioned this ad in Leo magazine, or not advertisement, but this announcement. And so that's why I looked at it. And it was a writing group that was starting up. So it was Coretta Jones. And when I first got in it, I called her and, I had her phone number. I called her and told her who I was and I would be interested. There were only 5 of us. And we met, we started out meeting at the U of L Ekstrom Library. Parking got to be a problem though, because as time went on, more and more people joined it, which was wonderful. We ended up at the Highland branch of the library. And early on, I became secretary because there were only 5 of us and somebody needed to do it. And I don't even remember how it ended up as when the time came that we said you have to put limits on how long, because I did that for years. And we did a lot of things. We ended up becoming a nonprofit. We had annual retreats. We had workshops. The first one that we did was at Spalding University. Maureen Moorhead was there. Gosh, I can't remember all the others, but she sticks out with me because I helped with the nomination and for her to become the Kentucky Poet Laureate. Anyway, so we had classrooms set up and workshops set up, and we ended up with more people than we predicted. We ended up with getting some people from out of town because I remember talking to these women who said, we didn't know where to stay. We stayed at the Brown Hotel. And, we had not a real dinner, but we had like a small gathering at Spalding at the end of the first day. I think we had it set up for 2 days. Zena Nasland was one of the women as well. But anyway, so that was fun and wonderful. And I ended up being president or director for a few years as well. And so many doors opened up. I met a lot of different people through.
And that was the Everyday Poet, If You Can Feel It. That was the name of the
Everyday Poet. If you feel it, you can write it.
You can write it. Okay.
And the idea was, people say, oh, I could never do that. You can.
So tell us about your the anthologies that you're a part of.
Most of them were through Women Who Write, but I'm also in a national anthology, and I can't remember the name of that one. One of them is the Heartland Review. It's part of I think it's still called the Elizabethtown Community College, I'm not sure. But they had an annual contest and winners for the contest, and I won that for a poem that I wrote called A Kite in January Skies, which was about my grandson when he was little, flying a kite in January when we had a nice day. And I know there's a magazine called the American Ex-Prisoners of War. I submitted poetry in that about my father's experience. Gosh, I had a little bit of, I don't have them all in front of me because, as you can tell, I haven't kept a great record of everything, but.
Well, 125 poems, that's amazing. So, and at some point, how did it start? You have done and still continue to do dream interpretations And you're the second person I've talked to about that. So how did that start?
I'm so happy to hear somebody else is out there with this. So it started in I think it was 1986 when I started like helping other people. My whole thing in life is I'm about other people. I'm about wanting to help a person. Something I'm real strong on is lifting people up. If there's somebody who is really down there feeling like that they're falling, I want to be the person pulling their arms up, or one of the persons saying, "Come on, let's help you. Let's help you." So that's partly where it started. But what happened is, I still have my book that I kept my dream diaries in, and still do. So I think it was 1986, but I had a very unusual dream. It did not make a lot of sense to me, but I wrote it down as soon as I had the dream, and thought about it off and on for several days. And I was just curious about whether this had meaning or not. Some people, especially professionals, think that dream interpretation is a bunch of malarkey. But I thought, you know what? In the Bible, they talk about Joseph's dreams. Native Americans put a lot of emphasis on dreaming, and so many times there's been a dream. And even in our interpretive world, we say, "Oh, I'm dreaming of doing that." So there must be something to this. So that was my first dream, and I started writing different ones down, and I started reading articles and books. And so you probably guessed I'm kind of an intense person. When I get interested in something, I devour it. So I started reading a lot. And then there was a class, and the whole time I'm still writing down my own dreams. There was a class that I took. I think it was the first one, I think, was an adult learning class, and it was at Atherton. And then I took another class that was like an 8-week, more intensive class, and started thinking, and started telling people, when they would talk about a dream, "Oh, I think I might be able to help you with that." So off and on, I would, let people know that if you want help understanding your dream, let me see if I can help you. Here's the thing. It's my belief, and I've read this, but it's my belief that our minds never stop. At least I know mine doesn't. And when we sleep, our subconscious helps sort through those things that we cannot comprehend or face or understand, how we can get out of a certain situation. That all comes through in our dreams. So when we dream, and there is symbolism in dreams, it's universal. Depending on culture, there may be certain things that mean something in one region and not in another, but universally there are certain things that are the same. So people started coming to me, and I said, "Okay, let me see if I can help you." And that went on for a few years. And finally, in 1994, 95, more people started coming to me, and I thought, okay, I'm not gonna hide this. I'm not gonna get out there and shout it to the rooftops, because that's just not my style. But I'm definitely gonna let people know that, hey, if you want help getting to the bottom of your problem, I always do a disclaimer. I am not a counselor. I am not a professional per se, but I know what I'm talking about. I've been doing this a long time. This is not guesswork. This is not when you go to when a friend says to another one, "Oh, I had this dream. I wonder what that means." And the other person speculating. This is based on studies, and even some of it is based on Freud and Jung, which they're older. It's a different line of thought, but there's a core meaning to this stuff. So I did that for a while, and then a few years back, something I noticed is some people would treat it like a parlor game, and they would go, "Oh, that can't possibly be what it means." And so the first time somebody said that, I wasn't offended because I thought I was right, but I thought, well, then why did you ask? So then I started saying, when somebody would say that, I would say, well, then why did you ask? We all have our own answers. So if you had the answers to your dream, you really don't need me. What I came to realize, I'm not a person who's interested in money, but I came to realize that a person who comes to me with a dream that they want interpreted, the value is, if I pay you, I am respecting you and honoring you as a professional, and I want your service. So I started doing that. And now I only do it a couple times a year. I go to a thing called Saturdays with Spirit, which is in Crestwood, Kentucky at Fox Hollow. A lady named Jenny Shanks leads that. So I go and they consider me a healer, Healer. So they put me in this beautiful space where I meet one-on-one with people. And afterwards, there's a table outside of the room where I'm set up, and they can write down anything that they want. And I encourage people to write it down as I'm talking to you. I take it a step further, and I do what I call a dream block. And in that dream block, I break down each category of your dream and each symbolism to help you. And then I always say to the person when I'm finished, does this make sense? Does this match? Does this help you? And a lot of times they're like, well, kind of. And I said, well, think about it, and keep a notebook or your phone by your bed. And every day when you wake up, tell yourself your dream. And this dream interpretation will likely tie in with what you're telling yourself today. I've had thank you notes from people that have called back and repeat clients. So it's my heart is so overflowing with gratefulness. And to hear somebody say, you really helped me with this, tells me that's a good thing. That person's going to take what they have and spread that.
Oh, absolutely. So, you've always been an optimist, and I can tell that. And I experienced that when I met you. And you said that you were fueled by your wisdom and kindness of your father. How did he inspire your optimism?
Oh my gosh. My parents were extreme contrast to each other. And I chose to listen to the voice of my father. He was amazing. He was a small man by stature, and my family on his side, they're all small. He was, to give you an idea, he was 5'8", and there were 8 brothers and sisters. There were only two sisters. So my dad, who was 5'8", was referred to as the tall uncle. Oh. So he was very little in stature, but he had this very deep, booming voice, and that man knew how to love. He always called me Little Bit, which I just think is so funny. Because, well, I was little when I was young, but I don't see myself that way anymore. He even called me that the day he died. But anyway, he grew up on a farm and had a rural background, and he only went to 6th grade because he had health problems and he had to help on the farm. But when he was in the service, he served in World War II. He was in the Army, and he served 28 months as a prisoner in Germany, a prisoner of war. So he couldn't talk about that for a long time. But when he did start to talk about it, I had aha moments constantly in understanding who he was. He was incredibly optimistic about everything in life. You turn everything into a good opportunity. So he would talk about things that happened to him when he was a prisoner, and some of it was very graphic, very hard to digest, especially thinking that he was only 24 years old when this first happened, and imagining what that must have felt like to a little country boy who hadn't even been out of Springfield, Kentucky until he was in the service. But he came to know some of the guards, some of the prison guards. One of them in particular gave Dad a nickname, and I don't know what it was, but it was the same nickname he gave his son because his son was serving for the Germans in another part of the war, and told my dad, you know, you could be my son. So, and then he started talking about when he got older, he had a life after death experience. And after that happened, he had some animosity toward his captors, but that dissipated. And he said, war is war. They were just doing their jobs like I was. He told the experience he had, which this is the one that really sticks out in my mind. And honestly, Laura, I think I was born an optimist. I love to laugh. I love to smile. I love to look at the brightest spots of life. And it doesn't mean things can't be dark sometimes, but it means in every experience in life, there's something beautiful to grasp onto. So my dad told the story. He had a team of horses that ran over him. They used to do, they called it field work. Sometimes it was working in the vegetable garden where they had to plow and do all the things that he did anyway when he was growing up, plant and harvest the vegetables, but they weren't allowed to eat any of it. They were starving. They never got to eat. He got a handful of sauerkraut once a day, every day for his entire time he was a prisoner. If they were caught even trying to eat a radish, they were punished. So he didn't do any of that. That was part of the field book. Another part of it was they would build roads and they would build buildings. So I am not exactly sure what type of work he was doing, but it was as part of this detailed work when the horses ran over him. And you have to remember in World War II, people think, oh, there's cars and all this. What's that all about? Well, they still used horses. And so I'm sure this incident happened when he was doing some type of work. It was winter, so it was probably something not in the garden, but, a road or a building or something. Anyway, so he was run over. He was hurt. They didn't look at him right away. Every day he got worse, and it was harder for him to get up and do his work. And they punished him for that. But at some point, they realized this man needs treatment. So this is what sticks out in my mind so much about my dad. They took him to a hospital, which that's not a hospital like we think of. Some of them could have just been, and this probably was as well, a house that had been converted or a building that really wasn't a hospital that they were using. But they took him to a hospital to have him treated. And he said he got to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. And it was the first time in his life, all growing up on the farm, all the times he worked with mules and horses, but he never got to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. So he was sick and he was laying in the back of the sleigh, and he chose to look at the snow. And he talked about how that snow looked like diamonds sparkling. So rather than to think, I'm so sick, his hand was mutilated, and instead of thinking, I might lose my hand, he kept thinking about what a beautiful day it was, and they were going to take care of him, and he got to see diamonds in the snow. So I don't think I know a lot of my optimism comes from that. He whistled all the time, and I never did learn to whistle. I tried to, but I couldn't. And I was the third daughter. He wanted a son really bad, and I was a third daughter. So when I came along, it was like, well, okay, I guess she'll be it. So he took me fishing every Sunday forever. He, would bring the snake skins to me and the bird nest, and he knew I liked being outdoors a lot. So he'd take me back in the woods, and we'd look at the different wildlife and birds. I am so attached to birds. There was a blue heron back there. I particularly remember one year that he led me to this sense of wonder. about life in all forms, and the sense of wonder about nature, and the sense of wonder of how we fit into that. And gosh, just an eternal gratefulness. He got to be my dad. He would say to me, we had apples all over the place, and we worked constantly. We were totally self-sustaining. And he would say to me when I was little, so I could get to the top of the tree, and he would go, reach higher, you can do it. So I did, and I still do. Yeah, he was pretty awesome. The last thing he said before he died was, he died, he spoke, and 2 minutes later he lifted his left arm up and died. But the last thing that he said is, love is all that matters.
What a wonderful chat we've had with Rita Spalding. Stay tuned next week for part 2. So as our time comes to a close, remember to keep creating, keep sharing, and keep supporting each other. And remember to bloom where you're planted. Bye for now.